world where academics is on the fringes of my life. And I really work with people who are in their lives, in their actions, in what they say, truly intellectual, because I find the difference between action and reflection quite arbitrary. You were told that I was a student of English literature, and I've read a famous poet called William Butler Yeats. And he says in one of his poems, "He that sings a lasting song thinks in a marrow bone." So for anything that really comes to the head, comes into our being, if you don't feel it in your marrow bone, it has no relevance. And my life in the last 40 years with extraordinarily ordinary people has led me to believe that my mind, for what it's worth, has been sharpened, has been challenged, has been monitored and brought to any kind of logic that it has today by people whom we normally dismiss as numbers, as very ordinary people who are on census lists, who are on electoral lists, and whom this famous poet Eduardo Galeano, who died in April this year, in his beautiful poem called The Nobodies, calls people who have no faces but just arms, people who are not human beings but human resources. So it's with these people that I have grown, and I want to tell you all, before I begin talking today, that they have been my friends, they have been my teachers, and they continue to be my monitors to make sure that I lead an ethical and accountable life. So whatever we've done in the Mazdoor Kisan Shakti Sangathan has been because of a very large collective of beings, most of whom we would pass by on the road without even bothering to see. So these are those great people whom India should really be proud of. Well, let me go today. I'm going to be brief. I'll try and finish. I was told I'd begin at 11:15. I've lost 10 minutes, 3 minutes because of my own rambling in the beginning. So I'll try and finish whatever I have to say. The idea of freedom, that's what India got in 1947 when I was 1 year old. What was this idea of freedom? The idea of freedom, we have so many debates, discussions in India now. The idea of India, or you have the dream of India. The Hindustan Times has huge conclaves in which they invite people from all over the world to come and tell you what is the idea of India. And I often wonder, why do you have to go far away? The idea of India is in the Indian Constitution's preamble. A wonderful constitution created by ourselves, by one of the most, chaired by one of the most eminent people in Indian intellectual history, Dr. Ambedkar, whose language and whose thought has always inspired me to believe that we as a people are a wonderful people. We have the intellect, we have the commitment, and we have the energy to state what we think. The Indian Constitution, you all know, was drafted by the Indian people, and there was a special Constituent Assembly which sat and drafted the preamble, and that's why we gave it unto ourselves. It was not given to us by somebody. And the Indian Constitution promised us four extraordinary things. I won't go into the detail. Promised us justice, it promised us liberty, it promised us equality, and it promised us fraternity. It ultimately promised us freedom. A country which was taking its shackles off, the British shackles off, and looking towards the future. It gave the promise of a just and equal India. Later on, we added the word socialist and secular. Why have I begun with the Indian Constitution? Because the Indian Constitution gives me the right to be a good, honest Indian citizen with rights. And early this year, on the 26th of January, the Government of India issued its own version of the preamble, removing two extremely important words from it, the word secular and the word socialist. And they said, when they were challenged about not having those two extremely important and extremely relevant political omissions, they said these were added later on, we went back to the original. But friends, for us today, the spirit of the Indian Constitution guarantees all of you your right to religion. It guarantees to me the right to be a woman with equality with men. It gives me the right to speak. It gives me the right to freedom of expression through prayer, through dress, through choices, through so many things. And today, if we tamper with the Indian Constitution, we are going to remove all our fundamental freedoms. And the Indian Constitution also stands behind the right to information law, which derives from Article 19 of the Indian Constitution. It's from the Article 19 that we derive everything. But when we say that the Indian Constitution is paramount, what do we understand by it? We must understand that when we begin a battle or a struggle for anything, say for independence, say for rights, we all get together, as happened in the big corruption campaign. Whereas when you say that there should be no corruption, there can hardly be any difference of opinion. Who wants corruption? Nobody does. Together and says we don't want corruption. But the moment you talk of corruption not merely as an ethical issue, but it's an issue of choices. When you talk about the economics of corruption, you talk about the politics of corruption, you talk about the social background to corruption, then come serious differences. Because it's not merely in not accepting money, it's also in the arbitrary use of power. Would you condone a human being who did not take money but ordered the killing of minorities? Would you condone the action of a person who may not really, in a strict and very narrow definition of corruption, accept to do something wrong because of a bribe, but will actually change policy to bring in inequality in India? So there are huge questions. So I'll just leave it at that, and I'll say, so when we dreamt of freedom in so many ways. Some people wanted to become officers, some wanted to grab power, some people wanted to become prime ministers and ministers, some others wanted to sit where the British sat. But freedom is much more than that. Freedom is not merely the power to vote. Freedom is freedom from inequality, freedom from discrimination. It's freedom from poverty, which we still haven't been able to achieve. It's freedom from poverty, it's freedom from all other economic inequalities. It is the freedom to make independent, clear, democratic choices, which means you'll have access to all democratic institutions, whether it's the panchayat, or whether it's the assembly, or whether it's the Lok Sabha, wherever, you'll have the freedom. And lately, the Supreme Court has delivered, according to my opinion, one of its worst orders, when they have said to stand for the local panchayat elections to become the sarpanch or the president or whatever we may call that person, you have to have passed 8th class, which I feel is, in the present condition of India, denying Dalits, denying tribals, denying women the right to stand for elections, because in large numbers we are still on the fringes of literacy. At the most you'll find women with a primary school certificate, seldom with a middle school certificate, in states like Bihar, Rajasthan, UP, so many states. We have also been marginalized from the politics of decision making. How do I get my power? By being able to decide what I should be doing. There's a very famous, beautiful poem of Bharatiyar, in which he says that more important than the actual conditionality of what we are is the conditionality of being free to express that conditionality. Saying that I am poor, I am hungry, the right to say it, and the right to see what will be my solution. Not the solution of patriarchy, not the solution of a fascist system, not of a military dictatorship. So if it has got to be a democratic decision-making process, how do I get space in the democratic decision-making process? It's terribly important. When I was a year old, partition took place in India, and I lived in Delhi. I'm actually a Delhiite, in the sense I speak Hindi as my mother tongue, and I live in northern India. In 1947, partition took place, and the worst kind of bloodshed that any child could have seen, I have not probably seen except one death, but I have heard and felt the agony of a society which is splintered, where there is communal bloodshed and communal hatred. And it's one of the worst things that can happen to any country in the world. And in India, for anyone who was born at the time I was and a little later, communal disharmony, communal violence is one of the worst things that can happen, which derails any other discussion, makes us religious in the worst definition of the term, makes us animals, reduces our rationality and pushes us into the realm of acting completely without our minds, which is what, for me, is my idea of hell. My idea of hell is being pushed into a corner where I lose control over my own mind and act in the most irrational manner, in the most bigoted manner, and within the most dogmatic framework. Just as India was recovering from it, Mahatma Gandhi was assassinated. And you all belong to a very good religious institution, and I want to share with you my understanding of why Mahatma Gandhi was in fact killed. Mahatma Gandhi was a religious man, but he was a secular human being. He wanted India's secular nature to exist. Secular, you all know, does not mean atheism. Secular means that the state has no religion. And in a country with so many different religions, so many different kinds of plurality in our lifestyles, plurality in our languages, in our food, in our dress, in everything, in our language, you simply cannot have uniform standardization. The man with his wisdom understood that being religious as he was, he admitted and accepted and performed in all his prayer meetings, prayers for every religion in this country and outside. There were even prayers under the Tao system of belief. He had to be killed, don't you understand? For any kind of bigotry to grab that kind of space of grey, to make India a bigoted country, Gandhi had to be killed. And for us, who were very young then and were grown up to understand the loss of that space, it's vital that we understand that for ordinary Indians today, that space has to be regained through religious discourse, which is not bigoted, through religious discourse, which is generous, with religious discourse that understands the other and is tolerant, and with a religious discourse which is basically ethical in understanding that after all religions say the same thing. And there's a famous saying of Mahatma Gandhi, कि धर्म का, भगवान का कोई धर्म नहीं है. God has no religion. God is, we all see him in our own ways, in different ways. And even if there is no God, you still remain a human being, a decent human being, if you accept that there is something called rationality which guides all human action. And the Hindu faith accepts even atheists as members of the religious fold. So in this country, where you have this kind of variety, to narrow it down to the narrowest, the lowest common minimum that is happening in this country today, recalls to me the vital role that Mahatma Gandhi played in those times and how important he was. But one anomaly that I grew up with after Gandhi, and Gandhi had said so many wonderful things and gave his life for things he believed in, because he just returned from Naukhali. I don't know how many of you have heard these names. From Naukhali, where he was protecting Muslims by living in a Muslim-dominated village to prevent the Hindus from killing the Muslims in what is now Bangladesh. He returned from there, and he, for me, symbolized compassion. And for me, if I think of Jesus, I think of Jesus for that last line of his before he was nailed to the cross, when he said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." It is the ultimate in compassion. And for me, Gandhi echoed that kind of compassion when he said, "I'd rather go to Pakistan than live in India where people are going to be killed because they belong to a different religion." So for us, the politics of Mahatma Gandhi was embedded in his morality, embedded in his religious perceptions and in his ideas. But what did he leave behind? I grew up in independent India, and to switch from a very, very somber and serious and fundamental position, I lived in independent India, I grew up in independent India, from a privileged background. You can make out from the way I speak English, that I come from a privileged background. Then I went into the colonial administrative service. It's a contradiction in terms that the colonial administrative service has not changed very much in essence and even in its externalities since the British left us. But I went into the Indian Administrative Service because as a feminist I wanted to work, and to work I needed a job, and I needed a job in which I did not have to go and beg anyone for work. So I taught for a year. I wasn't happy teaching English literature, so I went into the Indian Administrative Service, but with a lot of questions. And I want to tell you how feudal and how colonial the Indian Administrative Service was when I joined. And we had a probationer's handbook. I wish I had preserved it. A cousin of mine took it away because he thought it was the most hilarious book he had ever read. It said, when you walk down the street, and they gave it to us in 1968, when you walk down the street and you cross the lady on your left, you take your hat off with your right hand and bow. I said, this is 1968. No one wears hats in India anymore. There are women in the service. Now where are our hats? And to whom shall we bow? I was completely shocked. So the patriarchal system of the IAS, apart from its colonial system, was supreme. I was accosted by an IAS colleague who said to me, why are you in the IAS? A male colleague said, why are you in the IAS? You've deprived a man of sustaining his family. Why are women in the IAS? So that was the milieu, and that was the understanding of the civil service, and we never questioned it. We just accepted it for its halo that it carried forward from the times of the colonial ruler. Again, another very funny incident, we were taught horse riding. Why should we learn to ride horses? I can't afford a horse. I couldn't have afforded a horse. Of course, it's very expensive. But we were taught horse riding because our colonial masters rode horses to go into their districts to visit every subdivision and every small village. We drove in jeeps. We had drivers who drove us in jeeps. We said to the system, teach us how to deal with the mechanics of the jeep. For heaven's sake, don't teach us horse riding. But no, we had one man, I'll never forget in my life, was called Naval Singh, who was a horse riding teacher. And my maiden name was Aruna Roy, and I rode a horse called Kalyani, and she threw me. And I landed on my head, my solar topi broke, half of my face was bruised for many months, and he comes and stands there and said, Jairam, dismount ka order kisne diya? I said, what do you mean by dismount ka order kisne diya? Who asked you to dismount? I thrown off the horse. And you're saying to me, why? And then what did he say in Hindi? He said, you can't manage a horse. How are you going to manage your district? The illogic of that statement was something else. So I want to tell you that the civil system and the administrative system has never really worked for you and me. It has either worked principally to keep the status quo alive, listen to the political masters no matter what they said, or to keep their own system going, promotions, transfers, money, raises, the 7th pay commission, the 6th pay commission, the 11th pay commission, the 12th pay commissions, where you see their salaries going up. They don't care about the people for whom they have taken a pledge on the Indian Constitution to work. At that point of time, I was quite sure that the future did not hold very much for me within the system, that I had to get out of it. But to jump and come right back to the right to information days, there was a very eminent journalist called Prabhash Joshi, doyen of Hindi journalism, a Pandit from Pushkar, from Malwa, who knew his religion extremely well and was a practicing Hindu. But he was one of the biggest critics of the right-wing Hindu, which is now what we call Hindutva politics. And he wrote, and therefore they issued a fatwa against him, saying, the Bajrang Dal issued a fatwa saying that Prabhash Joshi should be killed or excommunicated or thrown out of Hinduism. He wrote a very, very important article, Hindu Hone Ka Dharma. He was a Hindi journalist. He was editor of Jansatta, then editor emeritus of Jansatta. He wrote an article called Hindu Hone Ka Dharma. In translation, you must all read it to understand the critique from within of the right-wing Hinduism that's dominating today. But he used to tell us a beautiful story. He said, we all know the story of Vikramaditya. Vikramaditya, the true king, the good king, the honest king, the ethical king. And he said in Malwa there is a story that if a shepherd goes out herding his sheep and he sits at one particular point, even the stupidest shepherd becomes extremely wise. So the whole of the area of Malwa, which is in Madhya Pradesh, wondered at it. So they went and dug that little hillock and they found the throne of Vikramaditya. So that's what lent this ordinary person so much wisdom. He used to say that there is a hill in Delhi called Raisina Hill. What stands on Raisina Hill? You all see the television. What stands on Raisina Hill? Anyone can hazard a guess? Sorry, louder. Rashtrapati Bhavan. Absolutely right. So he said in Delhi there's a hill called Raisina Hill. And if you dig deep enough under it, you'll find Wellesley's throne. So if the point is that this system continues to be a continuation of all that the legacy left by the British. They left several acts. Independent India did not change those acts, many of them, but I won't go into the whole gamut of those acts. Maybe even the Indian Penal Code needs some changes, the CRPC needs changes, so many laws need changes. But we've not looked at it because it suited the new brown Sahib who came to rule in the place of the white Sahib. To keep those rules and laws going, to control the people. The laws were enacted to control a nationalist Indian who might uprise and say that he wanted British to leave, but those laws continued. There was something called the Official Secrets Act which was passed in 1925, which forbade you from sharing any information with the people. This law was not set aside, and in my small village when I asked for the BPL list, the BDO would say, I'm extremely sorry, it's a secret document. You wanted to know what was said in some government circular, they'd say it's a secret document. The most misused form of legislation in colonial history, so far as the poor are concerned, is this negation of all sharing of information. And it is in that context that we realized how important it was to deal with the legal systems, to deal with legalities, no matter what your demands are. You have to have a broad spectrum approach to everything. Then the constitutional provisions, and the constitutional provisions you went back to, but the constitutional provisions, though Ambedkar, the great Dr. Ambedkar gave us the preamble, he also had a small note that he said to us, of what he said to us on the 26th of November, 1950, the day they gave the Constitution to Parliament. It's there for you to read, but I'll read it, the relevant parts. He says, we are going to enter into a life of contradictions. In politics, we'll be recognizing the principle of one person. He says one man, but I'll say one person. One person, one vote. One vote, one value. But in social and economic life, we shall be, by reason of our social and economic structure, continue to deny the principle of one person, one value. How long shall we continue to live this life of contradictions? So, and the last line is very significant for me because he says, we must remove this contradiction at the earliest possible moment, or else those who suffer from inequality will blow up the structure of political democracy, which this assembly has so laboriously built up. He issued words of very great caution, but we did not heed it. And in this country today, we have the greatest inequality, and we have the greatest poverty, we have the greatest lack of compassion, we have ruthlessness, where you think an elderly person who has given all her life to you, building, constructing, working her body off, she asks for a pension. 93% of our labor force is unorganized, and you say to her, 200 rupees a month. If you're lucky, if you're in the BPL list, if you're lucky to have got over the corruption of choice at your panchayat level, you will get 200 rupees a month at current prices. I think there can't be a greater shame on modern India than that statement. I'm 69 and I see my friends who have labored with me to get the RTI come day after month, year after year fighting for RTI, sitting on the streets, forgetting that they have to earn to feed their family for the larger common good, today being told you are redundant to society, you can die. We don't care what you do, you are not one of us. So it's with that great agony that I will play for you the first clip, please, a song sung by one of my great friends. When he plays the song, after the song I'll just explain it. Can you play the first clip, please?
संसद का हर एक खंभा मैंने ही उठाया रे,
संसद का हर एक खंभा मैंने ही उठाया रे।
सोने फुटपाथ पे ये मेरे लिए काम नहीं,
सोने फुटपाथ पे ये मेरे लिए काम नहीं।
He says, संसद का हर एक खंबा मैंने ही उठाया रे. What is a Sansad? Parliament. Khamba, pillars. So there's a metaphorical play on the word khamba. I have lifted every pillar because it was built by people like this woman whom you see sitting on the road. I have made the parliament, but today the parliament doesn't work for me. So I'll end it here and we'll carry on for the next session. Thank you very much for listening so patiently. Should I continue? Or is there a break? I'm not very clear.
5 minutes.
5 minutes break?
Yeah.
Thank you.
5 minutes means 5 minutes.
Please don't go away.
Stretch.